The Israeli military has blown up the house of a senior member of Hamas in the occupied West Bank. Saleh al-Aruri had spent 17 years in Israeli jails. He was released in 2010. Now, more than a week ago, Israeli forces took over his house and detained members of his family. Since the October 7th attacks by Hamas, more than 120 Palestinians have been killed in the occupied West Bank.
For more on this, let's cross live to the Israeli city of Tel Aviv and speak with Arai's special correspondent, Karl Bostic. Karl, thank you for joining us here on Newsday. Please bring us up to date on where we are in Gaza and what the chances are for a ceasefire.
Good afternoon. Well, you've already, indicated and mentioned this ground offensive taking place in Gaza, but just to understand more clearly what's going on is this. Gaza, it's a narrow strip of land no more than 25 miles long. Compared to, for example, Abuja, it's only a quarter the size of Abuja in area. However, the population of Gaza is almost the population of Abuja itself. Actually, it's maybe 70%, 2.3 million Gazans in that narrow strip, which is one of the most densely populated areas in the world. Of course, which is much larger, but that gives you an idea of just how small that is. And what the Israelis have done, they're maintaining that they need the ground offensive because the command structure of Hamas is largely in northern Gaza. And that command structure is also underground. They have a network of tunnels expanding at least almost as much as 300 miles underground, an underground city or metro, they call it. That's why they're on the ground now. And that's why they want to, they've been warning residents to please head south. But in doing so, you now have a displacement of about 800,000 Gazans from northern Gaza going into southern Gaza. And now you have a spiraling humanitarian crisis. At least 670 to 700,000 Gazans are now displaced, living in schools converted into shelters, hospitals converted into shelters. That's the humanitarian crisis we're talking about. And with only just a trickle of trucks bringing in food and water and medical aid each day, that's only a trickle. They talk about, you mentioned, increasing the truckloads going through Rafah crossing to 100 a day. Well, before the war, it was 500 trucks a day. So you have those really dire shortages right now. You also have electricity shortages for hospitals, for example, especially if it's an intensive neonatal clinics. You've got at least 50,000 women in Gaza who are pregnant, 5,000 births expected. If any operation is being performed with cesareans, that's without anesthesia. Patients lying on the floor, lying in quarters. Even with the trucks that do bring in food and supplies and medicine, that's only meeting 2% of those needs. So that's why there's a call for a ceasefire to allow for more aid to come through. At the same time, you've got Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu saying that ceasefire would only be a benefit to Hamas and would actually reward them for this. They're the ones that started this with this brutal terror attack on October 7th, where more than 1,400 Israelis were literally not only killed, but slaughtered, you could say. So there's that kind of defiance right there where they're saying that we need the ground offensive to go after them underground, and we can do it much more surgically as opposed to having aerial bombardment. I guess one final note to make, some critics of Hamas are saying that, well, this intricate underground network of tunnels that they've built and stockpile of tens of thousands of rockets, that's money that could have been used to finance Gaza's development and instead has gone the way into its military buildup. Nonetheless, that's fallen on deaf ears because for the people who see the spiraling humanitarian crisis, in other words, where there's more hunger, more despair, that's stoking anger not only in Gaza, but also in the region and around the world.
Thank you so much for that robust update on the situation on the ground. Of course, now, while all the immediate attention is on Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza, there's a second front where war could also break out. Now, could you remind us why a war against Hezbollah on Israel's northern border with Lebanon could have more dire consequences?
Well, Hezbollah has always kind of really been, in many ways, the elephant in the room because it's really a much more dangerous militant operation or terror operation, if you will, that's received backing from Iran ever since almost the founding of Iran's Islamic Republic back in '79. It's very well trained, well armed. Here in Israel, they say that Hezbollah is 10 times more powerful than Hamas. It's got long range rockets, for example. Here I am in Tel Aviv, the center of Israel, 140 miles from the border. despite those, tit-for-tat rocket exchanges you're seeing right now across the Lebanese-Israeli border up north, those rocket exchanges are going no more than 2 or 3 miles into Israel. However, here I am in Tel Aviv, 140 miles south of the Lebanese border, and they do have the rocket and missile capability to strike Tel Aviv, not only randomly, but with precision. So it'd be a much more deadlier thing. And it's a war they could fight also without even sending troops onto the ground. It would be a much, much bigger challenge for Israel if they had to combat Hezbollah on that front, but also because Hezbollah is really Iran's most important proxy. And by that, I'm saying that Iran has proxies in Syria, proxies in Yemen. It's Hezbollah, which is really the main proxy, the one that's been training those other groups in Syria and Yemen. So that's why ultimately a war against Hezbollah would be a war against Iran. That's why we'd be looking at a regional war, and that's why also we have not one but 2 U.S. carrier groups to really be stationed off the coast of Israel as a kind of deterrence against Iran, against Hezbollah from even thinking of escalating its attacks into Israel. And that's why the U.S. has urged Israel not to stage a preemptive strike against Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Well, thank you, Karl, for that update. Now, how are people responding to Prime Minister Netanyahu's handling of this crisis so far?
Well, even before the war began, he was very unpopular because of changes he was trying to make to the judicial system by overhauling it, because he was already facing corruption charges, which could have sent him to jail. And with a coalition government, that's Israel's most far-right government since its founding back in 1948, one that was geared to increasing and accelerating annexation of the West Bank. Those kinds of policies kind of really laid the ground for what transpired on October 7th, and also just policies that allowed for greater Jewish access to Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is in the Islam world the third holiest shrine in the Muslim world, but which Israelis or Jewish people also consider to be a holy ground. However, the biggest takeaway is that this was a colossal failure. The biggest military power in the Middle East, the world's most sophisticated state-of-the-art intelligence system, and there was no warning. How could they allow hundreds of militants scream across the border? And in short, he defied taking responsibility. The head of intelligence, the head of the military took responsibility. He's refused to take responsibility. In fact, he sent a midnight tweet Saturday night into Sunday saying that I wasn't warned by Shin Bet or by the military. A lot of backlash there because people are saying that you don't engage in a war and refuse to take responsibility, especially if you're the leader. So if anything, his refusal to take responsibility has really shaken confidence here in Israel against his leadership. And everywhere you are in Tel Aviv or elsewhere, there's nothing but criticism of the government and criticism of a government led by Benjamin Netanyahu. But while they're at war, they have to support him, they have to stand by him, because as he declares it, this is a second war of independence for Israel.
Well, we continue to wait to see how the situation will unfold further. Arise special correspondent Karl Bostic, thank you so much for your insight, and please do stay safe.